One of the most important and useful resources on our list is the Guidelines for Primary Source Literacy. So I want to take a few minutes to break it down and discuss how these guidelines can be used. So first, you may be asking, where do these guidelines even come from? They were approved in 2018 and were developed by the ACRL RBMS SAA Joint Task Force on the Development of Guidelines for Primary Source Literacy. These groups came together to create these guidelines because they wanted to articulate the range of knowledge, skills, and abilities required to effectively use primary sources. Basically, the document lays out skills students should learn by using primary sources and the best practices on how instructors and librarians can collaborate to use primary sources in instruction. But let's start at the very beginning. What are primary sources? According to the task force, they are materials in a variety of formats that serve as original evidence documenting a time period, an event, a work, people, or ideas. And primary source literacy, according to the task force, is the combination of knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary to effectively find, interpret, evaluate, and ethically use primary sources within specific disciplinary contexts in order to create new knowledge or to revise existing understandings. Now, there are some things that the task force took the time to explain before jumping into the core ideas and learning objectives that make up most of the document. So these are useful in terms of how to read these guidelines, but also things to keep in mind if you're looking to incorporate primary sources into a project or an entire course. The definitions of primary source and primary source literacy can vary. So that's why when we talked about them in that last slide, the definitions were pretty vague. A good rule of thumb to keep in mind when designing instruction is that topics to research can develop from using primary sources, or primary sources can be used in order to answer questions that were already in existence. Of course, primary source literacy can overlap with information literacy, digital literacy, visual literacy, so your lesson may incorporate any of these. Now, on to how to read these. The core ideas listed here are useful to see what students can learn by incorporating primary sources into a curriculum, and they may help to persuade a professor to collaborate with you as a librarian. The learning objectives listed here help to develop the actual student experiences and assessment strategies you'll use to determine their success. The core ideas of using primary sources in instruction are that students can learn analytical concepts. These include using primary sources to develop research questions and arguments, analyzing the historical context of sources, and understanding how interpretation of a source affects how it is seen and by whom. Ethical concepts. So these include understanding concepts about privacy and intellectual property rights and how those affect the use of primary sources. Theoretical concepts. In other words, how things like authority, context, historical empathy, values, and privilege affects who created the primary sources and who didn't, and what those gaps say. And practical considerations. These include the literal acts of using them, like finding, gathering information from them, handling them, and using the correct terminology when discussing them. The learning objectives are really helpful when you're thinking about what you want the outcome of your primary source project or course to be. So not all of these will apply to every project, so you can choose which will work best for your subject or timeline or student age level or any other factor. We're just going to do a quick overview. The whole idea is that a person who knows how to use primary sources can conceptualize. Basically, that they know what primary sources are and how they can influence research. Number 2, find and access. So again, literally finding the sources and also understanding the ways in which access may be limited, either today or over the history of that source. Number 3, read, understand, and summarize. So this includes identifying and relaying how a source was created, by whom, when, and what it is. Number 4, interpret, analyze, and evaluate. An example of this is realizing the context of a primary source with knowledge about the time and the culture it was created in, the author, its publication history, or related materials within a collection. Number 5, use and incorporate. This includes using many sources to support or dispute a research argument. So that's an overview of the guidelines for primary source literacy. They're a great resource for creating instruction using primary sources, especially with collaboration between teachers or professors and librarians or archivists.